Okay, we're now going to assemble the exterior and the lining. So grab your exterior piece and your lining. And you may need your interfacing, your stiff interfacing piece Q, but I'll get to that in a moment. For now, hit these bottom edges. We're going to measure from the corner 1 inch over and 1/4 of an inch up. And I already did that because I didn't want to be squinting with my camera in the way trying to figure this out. So I did a dot there and a dot there, and then I drew a line in between. Same thing over on this other bottom corner. Okay, now take your exterior piece, and you are going to fold these edges diagonally, make a point with a corner, and match up the sides. And then we're going to sew along this line that we just drew. And stop and back stitch at the dot. I'm going to repeat that on this corner. Okay, now you can do this next step in one of two ways. I have my Q pieces. Now this Peltex is what I'm using for the large, and it is just way too thick to sew this and then turn it right side out at this next step. So later on I'm going to insert it, and so I'm going to set this aside for now. One thing though is if you're going to be inserting it later on, you will cut off 1/4 inch in width, which then for the large makes this a square. So I went ahead and did that when I was cutting it out because I knew I wasn't going to sew it at this stage. I'm going to set that aside. For the small cube, for this one, I'm doing Decaville Light, which is fairly lightweight. And so I am going to sew it to in this next step all together. I recommend in the pattern that you don't do it this way for the size small, but I am going to do it for my version because this is lightweight and all of my exterior is lightweight, so it shouldn't be too bad for turning. But for most interfacings and fabric combinations, I would not sew this interfacing at the step for the small. Okay, so for the small, first I'm going to place the interfacing behind or on the wrong side of the lining, and I am having the fusible side, if you have a fusible side to your interfacing, have it face away from the lining. And it's going to be flush with this bottom edge of the lining, which means it's not going to go all the way to the top up here. And that's how it's supposed to be. Now with the sticky side down when we sew, that is going to make it a little tricky to sew. I generally use tissue paper or even a tissue, a Kleenex or something like that, a facial tissue, and I place it underneath while I'm sewing so that it doesn't stick to my feed dogs. All right, so now I'm going to take my exterior and I'm going to start at the top. And I'm going to do the top on both sides. And this is wider than the lining, so there is going to be extra fabric right here. Now, because of this corner that you have sewn, this dot should be a 1/4 inch away from this edge over here. I'm going to repeat that on this side. And this dot should be a 1/4 inch away from the bottom seam as well. And then here at the bottom, if I pull these corners away, this dot should be a 1/4 inch away from the side seam. And then I'm going to sew this, but first I'm going to, since I have my brown thread in, I'm going to do the brown one first. So with the large that I'm doing, it's the same thing, but without this one I'm not doing the interfacing underneath, which will mean it's a little easier to sew, a little less thick. And I'm going to start same way at the top corner on both sides. And on this one, I need to make sure that I push flat the gussets as I'm sewing them. So I'm going to go ahead and clip this all the way around. All right, I have placed the clips all the way around on my size large. And I'm going to go ahead and start sewing. Remember, this is a 1/4 inch 6mm seam allowance. What I like to do is if I go over a thick spot, I just go back and then forward again. And I'm going to sew all the way till I get to this dot where this corner seam ends. And back stitch. Then I'm going to take this corner and fold it away. I'm going to start sewing on this dot, back stitch, and sew right here. Now, once again, I am struggling with this part being thick and my foot wants to move. So I'm going to move my foot over like this. You can also switch to your zipper foot there if you need to. All the way to the dot. And right here, same thing, starting at the dot and sewing straight. And then right here it's kind of thick, so I'm going to go back, forward. Same thing right here. Okay. Now, whether I have the interfacing or not, it's the same for this next step. I'm going to trim off about half of the seam allowance all the way around. I'm also going to trim off this extra corner part. So I'm just going to snip along here to make that easier. Okay. And I'm going to trim this seam allowance in half. All right. Now I'm going to turn this right side out. And if you have something to poke your corners out, do that. Down here at the mitered edge. But be gentle because you don't want to poke through the fabric. If your corner doesn't look good, just keep gently pushing out the different parts of it. Sometimes this one doesn't look like it wants to go out, so I look inside and I say, oh, this part's kind of folded in there. This part needs to just be poked out a little bit more. Ah, there. Okay. And I'm just going to flatten this all the way around. This is not, we're not going to put the stiff interfacing in yet, but if you want to, you can go press this to make it a little more flat. Right now I'm putting this in and I'm trying to push the seam allowances out. I'd like them to be out and not in. Sometimes they want to go in by themselves. When I mean out, I mean towards the outside, not towards the in. All right. Look at that. Pretty close to the end. Now we're going to start sewing the top part and then we'll sew them together. And I am going to go ahead and sew the gray and turn that right side out as well. All right, I sewed the small, and you can see the tissue that I used on the back didn't fully come off, but that's okay. Since this isn't going to get seen, I don't mind. I'm going to turn this right side out, and I think this will be okay, even maybe a little tricky, but not too bad to turn right side out. And I'll poke out these corners. And it's very important to not skip the part where you trim the seam allowance, because otherwise this won't fit properly Sorry, I gotta stay on this camera screen. Just working this with my fingers before I use the pokey thing. For this one, I'm a little nervous of poking a hole in the vinyl, nylon, or whatever this is. Okay. Then on this side, poking it with my fingers first. Much better. There. Okay, I might need to work on this just a little bit more, but for now, this is good. And when we're done, we will fuse it, but not yet. Okay, so now we're going to work on the top part. I'm going to show you how to do both the frame and the zipper version.